Okay, before you say anything, this is not clickbait. I have actually switched from the iPhone 16 Pro Max to the iPhone 16e, and I don't think I'm going back. Did I really just say that? Okay, before I get started, two things. Firstly, I'm very tired and jet lagged and I've been traveling loads recently, and for that reason, anything could happen in this video. And secondly, I want to read a comment that I received recently from Howie B 2001. This is a shortened version, but the sentiment is still there. I've become increasingly niggled by my 16 Pro Max, which is really just last year's phone again. In a moment of enlightenment, I put the 16 Pro Max on eBay and ordered the 16e, which was delivered today. It's such a breath of fresh air, simple, unpretentious, compact, and a throwback to what I think was a better time for tech. That really caught my eye because when I received that, I had just pre-ordered the iPhone 16e, begrudgingly. I thought, let's get it in, let's review it, but I'm not going to spend much time on it. Then I saw Howie B 2001's comment, and I thought, that's an interesting point because personally, I'm getting a bit bored of the iPhone 16 Pro Max. It's massive, it's not been performing, in fact, it's been performing quite badly recently. I had to turn off Apple Intelligence because that seemed to be slowing the phone down, although even turning that off, it's still sluggish. And then I read that comment, this arrived, I put my SIM card, my main SIM card from this into this. I took this to Barcelona for a week and used it as my main phone. I'm now back from Barcelona and I don't want to take the SIM card out of this and put it back into here. I didn't expect this at all. Now, this review is going to be a simple case of me going through the good things about the iPhone 16e and the bad things. As simple as that. It's in a completely random order, and then I'll explain who this phone is for. Also, guys, if you've been watching this channel for a while but you haven't hit that subscribe button, you know where that button is, down there somewhere. If you're watching this channel on TV, which more and more people are doing, it's a bit of a faff to find where the subscribe button is. Pick up your phone, find the channel, hit subscribe. It's massively appreciated. Also, we're getting towards the end of our massive 200k subscriber giveaway. If you don't want to miss out on winning lots of very cool tech, then get involved. There's a link down below in the description. Thank you to Backmarket for supporting us with this. That's all of the plugs done. Let's get into the iPhone 16e. Let's start with the good stuff, and firstly, the design. You can argue with me in the comments about this. I think the iPhone 16e is one of the best looking iPhones that Apple has ever made. Ironically, the fact that it only has one camera bump makes it cleaner, it makes it more Apple basically. It's such a good looking thing. There is a problem with the black color, which I will get onto later, but that aside, I think it looks lovely. The other thing I love about it is the size. Now, I usually have my iPhone 16 Pro Max in my pocket or in my bag or wherever, and it's just huge. And most phones are this big these days. They're massive things. But when you go from this to this, and the size difference is almost comical, you realize that these phones are a bit too big most of the time. The fact that you can walk around with this with one hand and text and get around iOS with no problems, no worries about dropping it. And it was an incredibly easy phone to travel with last week in Barcelona. It was a breath of fresh air. The other thing I like about this phone is that it doesn't have the camera control. Now, if you've been living under a rock for the last few months, you may not be aware that the iPhone 16 and the 16 Pro and the 16 Pro Max has this thing here, which is the camera control. But it's utterly useless because as soon as you try and take a photo with it, your framing goes all skew-if, and it's just annoying. You keep pressing it by mistake. It's just horrible. This phone demonstrates that we don't need that. The other thing it demonstrates is that we don't need that dynamic island. Now, again, if you weren't aware, the iPhone 16e has the notch, but it doesn't have that, which is the dynamic island, or as I have jokingly called it quite a bit recently, the monkey island. To be honest, if they took that away from my iPhone 16 Pro Max, I don't think I'd notice the difference. And again, the iPhone 16e, just like the camera control, demonstrates that we don't need that. What we do need is a pinhole camera instead of these massive cutouts. The other thing that I don't miss, and this is going to be controversial, is MagSafe. So when the iPhone 16e was launched, everyone jumped on the fact that it didn't have MagSafe and said it's not fair. You know, it's been there since the iPhone 12. Why doesn't it have MagSafe? Since I've been using this, I genuinely can't remember what I used MagSafe on the iPhone 16 Pro Max for, apart from attaching a wallet to the back of it sometimes and attaching chargers to the back of it. Now, remember, this still has wireless charging. And if you get a case like this from ESR, you gain the magnetic attachment. So you can still attach it to magnetic Qi chargers. You can attach your wallet to the back of it. It's a bit like having MagSafe. Battery life has been fantastic, and when I say fantastic, I mean in the context of the iPhone, because for me, I think the iPhone 13 Pro Max was the highlight for me. That was such an amazing performer when it came to battery life, but even my iPhone 16 Pro Max hasn't been great. This has been fantastic. Now, bearing in mind, I took this traveling, so I was doing lots of maps, navigation, loads of communication with home, and calls and FaceTime stuff, and whacking up the screen brightness because I was outside quite a bit in very bright sunlight and that sort of stuff. Most days I took it off the charger with 100% at about 6 a.m. and by the time I got to about 7 o'clock at night, it still had 35% remaining on pretty much every single day. It's definitely a 2-day phone if you're not a heavy user, and if you are a heavy user, you're not going to run out of battery in one day. It's going to last perfectly for that day. So battery life, I think Apple has absolutely nailed on the iPhone 16e. So the iPhone 16e is definitely dividing opinion, but the one thing we can agree on is the fact that you still need great protection. That's where ESR comes in. This is their CyberTough case, and it has 7 times military-grade drop protection, which to you and me means you can drop it from 23 feet, which isn't that far, but regardless, it will be absolutely fine if that happens. If you fancy something slimmer, there's the ESR Classic Hybrid case. This still gives you that solid protection with reinforced corners while keeping that clean iPhone look. And yes, both cases feature built-in magnetic rings, which enables seamless compatibility with a variety of MagSafe chargers and accessories, which allows you to mix and match effortlessly. And if you have the iPhone 16e, which doesn't have MagSafe, that's a blessing. And as for the screen, ESR's UltraFit Armorite Protector is probably the easiest one I've ever installed. There's 2 steps, no dust, no bubbles, and it's tough enough to resist scratches for years, which if you're buying the iPhone 16e is very important because you'll keep this for years. So if you're going to buy the iPhone 16e and you want proper protection, which trust me you do, check out ESR. The link is down below. When it comes to performance, it's a very quick phone. There is a caveat to that, which I'll come on to in a second, but there's no getting away from the fact that this has the latest A18 chip in here. Yes, it has 1 less GPU core than the iPhone 16, but that doesn't matter. You're not going to notice that. And yes, it does have access to Apple Intelligence, which is still a whole other topic, but at least it's there. It's got all of the latest stuff. The C1 modem, which is Apple's first ever modem, normally they use Qualcomm modems, it was a bit of a non-event during the release of this. They kind of mentioned it, but then moved on very quickly. Does it result in a better signal, a better 5G signal? I don't think it does, personally. I think it's just the same, but I've never really had a problem with the iPhone signal. So all I can say about the C1 modem at the moment is it's not any worse, and that's a good thing. To give you an idea of how this thing is perceived in the world of tech press and tech YouTube, whenever I got this out of my pocket in Barcelona, which is where I was basically there for a big conference, MWC, so I was always surrounded by a lot of other YouTubers and tech press people. When this came out, there was pointing, there was sniggering, there was the kind of, oh, you've brought that, have you? Brilliant, I can't wait to see your review. It's just, it's the laughing stock, basically. But it's a deeply flawed phone, and the reason it is the laughing stock is because the people that review this stuff, like myself, know that there are so many better alternatives in the world of Android land. The Nothing Phone 3A, £329. This is a much better phone than this. It's a very different phone, and it's Android versus iOS and all that stuff, but when you know what you get for far less than 400 quid versus £500, $500, or even at the top end, 900. No, is it 9? Whatever it is, 899. It's not great. But my list of things that I don't like about the iPhone 16e starts with the design, which I know I said was one of the best things about it earlier, but if you go for the black version, as I've just demonstrated, if you catch your fingernail on it, this is a bit of an extreme example, but if I accidentally catch my fingernail on it or something relatively sharp, it immediately leaves these horrible scratches. Now, they're not actually scratches. I can wipe them off, and as you can see, they just go. It just basically means that if you don't use a case, it's going to look like an absolute mess within seconds. It's classic Apple. They have these beautiful finishes which just don't work in the real world. The display is the big one. So to put this in context, again, this £329 Nothing Phone 3A has a 120Hz variable refresh rate, which means it's got a very smooth display. It's very hard. In fact, I think it's impossible to buy an Android phone that doesn't have a 120Hz display these days. At the very least, it will have a 90Hz display. This has a 60Hz display. And the best way to describe how that feels is, if you've been using an iPhone 16 Pro Max, for instance, it feels like you've got that energy saving mode turned on all the time. Because if you turn that on this, the display drops down in terms of the refresh rate, and it feels a bit slower. It's like that all the time on this. And as a result of that, it's unfair because, as mentioned earlier, this is a very fast phone. It has the A18 chip in there. It's very capable, but the display makes it feel sluggish. It's just like the iPad mini, the iPad Air. They all have the same issue because Apple has kind of painted itself into this display corner where it's made ProMotion, as they call it, a pro feature. So if you want a 120 Hz variable refresh rate, you have to get the Pro or the Pro Max. This was never going to have a high refresh rate display, and it's such a shame. The other thing it doesn't have is an always on display, which isn't as bad as the ProMotion thing, but it does age this phone immediately because, again, I've become so used to having the time always displayed on the iPhone 16 Pro Max and, again, every other Android phone, that the fact that this is just a black screen when it's not being used makes it feel old. The camera system, even though it looks very clean on the back of the phone, is very restrictive. There's no ultra wide, which is something I missed more than I thought I would. Just the ability to kind of really open up the frame and get everything in is something I do more than I thought, basically. So that's a really annoying thing. Also, the zoom, you get 2x. You can go from 1x to 2x, which isn't a massive difference. It takes good photos at 1x and 2x, absolutely. But beyond that, it's completely unusable. Basically, you get 2x and that's it. It does good video as well, actually. I used it on a trip with Porsche in Barcelona where we were driving across these amazing mountainous roads in these classic Porsches, and I was using this to get some footage for a short form video, and it's done a really good job of that, really good. But as a content creator, it felt restrictive, and even in my everyday personal life, the inability to have that wide angle or macro occasionally, or just get a little bit further, go beyond 2x and have it usable, is massively restrictive. That is the list of the bad things. So it's a much shorter list than the good things, but it begs the question, who is this for? The iPhone 16e is for people who need to upgrade their old iPhone. It's as simple as that. If you've got an iPhone 7, an 8, a 12 maybe, an SE, and that phone is dying, if the battery isn't what it used to be, if the screen is smashed and if it's slow, etc. If you just need a new iPhone, this is the one that you're probably going to buy. And because you've waited years to upgrade, the things that I listed earlier as good points, you're going to love, and they're going to feel like massive upgrades. Even the camera system is going to feel significantly better. The battery life is going to be wonderful. The display will be better probably as well, ironically. The design you'll love. And Apple knows its numbers. It knows how many old iPhones are out there. It can only sell new iPhones to new people for so long. At some point, it has to get the stragglers, the people who haven't upgraded for years, to come across and buy something new. However, if you are on the fence, if you're not an Apple person and you're looking to go with either a new iPhone or a new Android device, this has way too much competition in Android land. Way too much competition, to the point where I would not recommend it. I would just go for Android because you'll get so much more for your money. As for me, I have switched from the iPhone 16 Pro Max to the iPhone 16e, and I can't be bothered to put my SIM card and everything else back into this, which means, weirdly, I'm now an iPhone 16e user, which I really wasn't expecting. But it's over to you now, guys. What do you think about the iPhone 16e? Get involved in the comments.